Greetings, my name is JC,
And I'm Ian.
and this is the Gamer's Gaiden. In this episode, we're going to be talking about handheld video games. But before we get into that, Ian, what have you been playing this week?
I played an amazing game this week
Yeah,
called the Untitled Goose Game.
awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing. You play a goose, you're a jerk, you terrorize a town,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah. The only complaint that I have about this game was it took me like between 2 and 3 hours to finish it.
Okay.
And I messed around a little bit. Like I probably could have gone straight through. There was a couple of the optional objectives that I didn't complete,
Mm-hmm.
and there are also some hidden objectives too,
Right.
which you have to figure out as you go.
Okay.
I didn't get all of those.
Oh, okay.
So if I went back, I
Maybe
could
add
probably
another.
spend another hour or two messing
Oh, okay.
around. But yeah, literally, my only complaint was that it was short, and that's barely a complaint because even at 2 hours, it cost me $20.
Mhm.
That is $10 an hour, and I have had games where I've not gotten that much enjoyment.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a must buy if you have a Switch. I think it's on everything actually.
Yeah, it's
If
on
you have a
almost all.
video game console, you're probably watching this. Pause right now, go buy the Goose Game, play it for 2 hours, then come back. Welcome back. It's great, isn't it? And I finally started playing a little bit of Gears 5 with
Cool.
my wonderful wife, Genevieve. And yeah, we
How
got
do
about
you-
an hour in,
Yeah.
but we were playing split screen because we only had the one copy of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, we only have one Xbox One.
Okay.
And yeah, it was great. It's beautiful, but we're both like, this is way too small.
Right.
So I was
Are you
looking.
gonna buy another one?
So actually, yeah, I was like, well, maybe I should just, figure out how to get another Xbox One. I mean, a One X might be cool. But as
Okay.
I'm flicking through the marketplace, and I think you still can. You can get Game Pass Ultimate,
Mm-hmm.
which includes a live subscription
Right.
for 2 months
Mm-hmm.
for $2.
Oh, okay. That's actually really good.
$2. And that gives you access to Game Pass on the PC as well.
Oh, okay. So are you gonna be able to play PC to Xbox?
Yes, because it
Wow.
has
Okay.
cross-platform compatibility.
Nice.
So yeah, we are going to play it that way. I think I played about an hour of the Horde mode
Oh, okay.
on PC, and it ran fantastic. It's kind of hilarious because there's some alternate skins.
Mm-hmm.
I was using because it gives you the the more expensive version, like the legendary edition or whatever, the one that would be like $90.
Oh, okay.
That's the one you get through Game Pass.
Weird.
I know,
Alright.
right? You can get the regular one, but you can also get this one too.
Right,
So
you
I
have
was like,
access to
yeah, of
both.
course, give me additional characters and
May as
content.
well.
So I was playing as one of the Spartans from Halo Reach,
Mm-hmm.
which was kind of neat. But there was also a Sarah Connor running around because they have a Terminator skin pack,
Oh, okay.
which comes packed in with the game.
Right.
And yeah, if you play it, I think sometime in September,
Mm-hmm.
which by the time you watch this, you won't be able to do.
Yeah.
But you could have gotten a Dave Batista skin.
Nice.
He replaces one of Marcus Phoenix's. He's like an alternate skin for Marcus Phoenix,
Okay.
which is kind of hilarious. But yeah, so there was me. I think there was one or two actual Gears characters of the five of us.
Right.
Everybody else was there was a Sarah Connor,
Okay.
there was a Batista. Yeah, it was just kind of silly, but we had a lot of fun.
Cool.
A bunch of strangers. Yeah. Yeah, and what's neat about this that wasn't in the last time I played Horde mode, and that was in Gears 3. So,
Mhm.
I mean, they might have changed it in 4,
Right.
but you actually, if someone drops out, it just replaces them with an AI-controlled
Oh, that's really smart.
unit.
Oh,
So,
the AI might be pretty dumb, but it's still better than nothing.
yeah, it's better than nothing, because the Horde we played, Horde is 50 rounds.
Oh, okay. That's pretty intense.
Yeah, and I got to 30, and it had taken like an hour and a half.
So will it drop somebody back in if somebody tries to like find a game and you're playing and
See
there's a no
that
bot there?
I don't know. I don't
Oh,
know
okay.
if it'll like if it'll put a random back into your
Right.
game.
Hopefully it does.
Yeah, it'd be kind of neat. But we ended up at an hour and a half in. At round 30, we were down to 2 humans.
Okay.
And I was just like, I cannot stay awake for another hour to get through all 50 waves of this.
Fair enough.
So I dropped out too. But I had a really good time with it. And I'm
Mm.
really looking forward to getting back into the single player because we were having fun with the story.
Right. Yeah. Those
So,
campaigns are usually really good.
but that's it for me. JC, what were you playing this week?
I've been playing a few games. Two of them that I'll go over is League of Legends.
League of Legends.
Well, Worlds is happening, and
Worlds.
I mean, come on, it's the best teams in the world
Just-
playing right now against each other. And
Sure.
Fnatic's
I mean,
gonna
yes.
win. Hopefully, I doubt it, but still, that's who I'm cheering for. Yeah, they're doing the quests for the Worlds 2019. So I've been basically grinding out matches for those. The quests are surprisingly really simplistic. A lot of them there's like different tiers of them, and I think the largest one is get 200 points. And for all of the different tiers, I think there's 6 or 8 of them. It's a win gives you 5 points, and a loss gets you 2 points. And then whenever you fill up a bar, you get a reward basically. So you have to basically, at a bare minimum, you have to lose 100 games within the next 6-7 weeks. So got a lot of games to play. So all my
Wow.
games aren't going to be losses,
you.
obviously. So, well, I've already played like maybe 20 of them, and I think we had like an 80% win rate.
Well, that's
So
pretty good.
yeah. So I'm actually almost done the first one. But anyway, so
I'm kind of disappointed that they went that route because some of the quests in the past have been really fun.
yeah, because they actually. That's one thing that I kind of wanted to bring up. I found it really disappointing that the Star Guardian skin line quests were very bland. There's actually only 4 or 5 quests of them, and I actually completed them in a day. It was
Oh.
like there wasn't even the special map for it.
Oh, that's really lame.
Yeah, it was pretty dumb. And so their quests were pretty simple too, although they were more varied than these ones. And like I bought the Game Pass so that I can get more of the quests for this because the Worlds has a Game Pass where the last Star Guardian one didn't, which kind of gives me a reason why it wasn't as elaborate. But this one just seems to be grinding out matches without take out like 20 towers or 100 shutdowns or collect 20,000 gold or whatever, like their normal quests that are actually like I actually have to like do AD damage to complete this quest, and I always play Zyra, which is AP, and I got to play a little bit differently, and
Oh
I
yeah,
need to
or
play in
it's like
Rakan or something.
win a game with one of these 4 champions.
Yeah, exactly. Especially since they have like a lot of new skin lines coming out. Like there's some new High Noon ones that are coming out that look pretty stellar, and they just released some new skin lines that like there's a new Nami skin which is really great, and a Riven skin that's pretty awesome. Yeah, and they could base some of the quests around that since they're new, and I guess it's not 100% related to Worlds, and they don't want to force people to buy the skins, so that might be why. But anyway, so I've been playing that, been having some fun, and also as I kind of mentioned a little bit in the last episode, I played a little bit more of Overland.
Yeah?
And so this game is actually really neat. I played a little bit more of it. We talked about it last episode where we talked about animal companions in video games. And game was brought up because you can have human companions and dog companions in your party. And effectively, it's kind of like a Oregon Trail XCOM hybrid style strategy game where you basically have limited resources like gasoline and weapons and med kits and stuff like that. And you basically have to make it through the map and avoid these alien creatures that are attracted by sound and by movement and stuff like that.
Okay.
And they come over towards you, and they have like some of them move 2 squares, some of them move 1. I haven't gotten overly far in the game. I think I've gotten about halfway. My character keeps on dying. But yeah, so you can save people and they can save you, and you can leave people behind. You got to make pretty hard decisions on like I only have this much fuel. we think there's some supplies at this place. It's going to use 3 fuel points, and over here some medical supplies. It's 5 fuel points away, but like that's all the fuel that we have. Or we can just drive straight through and try and see what's over here and use up all of our fuel as well. And it's a map that goes from the east coast to the west coast, and you just have to make these like determining decisions on what it is that you're going to do and conserve um, your items and your health really, because if you get attacked then you'll be hurt and then you won't be able to move as far and stuff like that, so
Oh,
you'll need
geez.
like
Okay.
medical supplies, and also your vehicles. There's like vans and trucks and cars from what I've seen so far. I think there might be a Jeep too, but so they have different like some of them have racks above them so they can hold more things, or like the pickup truck you can throw stuff in the back. The van can hold like 5 people, but like the car can't. It can only hold 4 people. So if you have found too many people who want saving, you'll have to leave some of them behind, right? So like you've got to make these decisions to try and make your way over to the West Coast, which is the ultimate end goal of the game. And it's really neat because the further you get, I guess, to the West Coast and further you get into the game, the world gets creepier because like something's going on with like an alien invasion or something like that. Um, and it doesn't really fully explain to you what's going on, and it just gets weirder, and like some anti-gravity things start happening and stuff like that, like once you get into the middle of the United States. And it's just really really neat because like there's even a darkness feature where like everything's kind of blacked out and you can only see like 1 square away from you, for example, and you just don't know where the aliens are, but sometimes you can see like a little blip of like movement or something. It's a little animation that shows you that something moved in this area, so you're probably going to want to
Okay.
avoid that area and stuff like that. But you got to explore and find your items and stuff like that to continually progress through all the different locations. And yeah, definitely difficult. I tried it on normal difficulty and I tried it on hard difficulty to see what the difference was. And yeah, it's pretty challenging, like puzzle like game that has XCOM type or Banner Saga type interface, and has a lot of resource management and stuff like that. A little bit of survival horror aspect to it. So if you like those types of games, I definitely recommend that you check it out. And yeah, it's pretty fun. Those are the games that I've been playing. So let's go into the main topic for this week: handheld video games, and start off with the origin, as most stories begin at the origin. Let's go back to the beginning of where this all started. So companies like Mattel, Parker Brothers, and Milton Bradley during the 70s made these toys basically that had interface. They're basically like plastic and LED lights instead of like LCD panels and stuff like that, which a lot of us are seen and are kind of accustomed to.
Yeah, they're super simplistic.
hmm
Um,
And they basically have like little interface buttons that you can tap with and interface with, and it kind of shows you the LED light of what's kind of going on in order to like either simulate action, whether it's a sports game, which a lot of these were, or a puzzle game, which is kind of like the two main genres of these types of games that I've seen at least.
yeah, you basically had like there was like football,
hmm
racing,
Yep.
and then I think like Simon.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually have a old Simon from machine from the late 70s or early 80s. That was my grandparents from Radio Shack that came from that time. That's pretty neat. It's got the 4 buttons, and like you can interface with it and it lights up, and you just gotta keep on repeating the patterns. And I always found that fun as a kid. Whenever.
Yeah, actually, I had one of the, I want to say, Mattel football games. Well, it
hmm
was my dad's, but
Yep.
yeah, I had that as a kid, and I like it. Oh, it took a 9-volt battery to run,
hmm
which was crazy because nothing runs on 9-volt batteries anymore.
Yeah.
And
Except for your smoke alarms and stuff like that.
and even those,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, even those are like now
usually
they
like
start
double A's.
or they plug right into the power of the
Yeah,
house. So,
also that. Um, but yeah, no, it was great. You had like an up and down, forward, back, and a pass button.
hmm
It was kind of neat. It was like the little blinking light was whoever had the ball, and
yeah.
you could like pass it, and the little blinking light would like quickly move across the screen.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, it was super simple, but I got like hours out of like playing this thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it
Even
was.
as even like finding it as a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
I haven't found it in a while. I'm gonna have to dig through my parents' house to see if I can find this.
Yeah,
But I still had fun in my teens with that, and
it's
I don't
in,
even like football.
it's interesting because these early games have very simple game loops, but were pretty innovating in how they kind of like entertained their players.
Yeah,
And yeah, so it kind of started in that fashion, and eventually they would get a little bit more complicating, where there'd be like an actual LCD screen, which would have like set like images that would show up depending on like what got power and where you are, to be able to show you, similar to the Tiger Electronics stuff, which it eventually got into, which we'll go into later. But yeah, that's where it effectively started with. But after that, and with these LCD technology kind of took off a little bit, there was the Game and Watch series by Nintendo, which is one of the main early versions of a portable like a video game essentially. And it was interesting about this is they all kind of folded sort of like a Nintendo DS, which is sort of what the Nintendo DS is based off of, and they
yep,
generally always had two screens, and some of them opened up like a book, and then some of them opened up like a notepad, like a vertical or horizontal orientation, and they had different buttons to interface with them, and then the LCD screens would show you basically the action that's going on, and there'd be um, various simple game loops that would be presented through the Game and Watch collection. Some of them would be just action between the two screens. Like there's one where you're basically bouncing uh like toads safely off of the castle into like a bucket onto the other side, for example. um and most of these have been collected on the Game and Watch collections for the Game Boy. And I think the fourth one is Game Boy Color game, if I recall correctly. It's in a black case. That's usually what that means. Or they're available on the Virtual Console. So the latest system would be the Wii U, for example, or I think you can get some of them on the 3DS still. So they're still semi-accessible. Hopefully, they'll eventually release a collection for the Switch. But another interesting fact about the Game and Watch is this is actually where the D-pad was invented. In 1982, Nintendo filed a patent for a cross D-pad. They had used four-button D-pads, much like the Joy-Con controllers earlier. And so had other people, like the Milton Bradley thing is just four buttons that up, down, left, and right, really. But
yeah,
the actual cross D-pad that most of us know that are on the Nintendo controller or the Super Nintendo controller patent came from the Game and Watch game Donkey Kong, which I had said come out in 1982. It was interesting because due to this patent and the like massive innovation that this created, other companies tried to duplicate them. One of those companies being Sega. And to work around this patent, everybody kind of tweaked the D-pad to their own spec to be different enough that it wasn't infringing on the patent. And like Sega got around it, for example, by making the D-pad more circular, which if you've played a Genesis or a Master System on their controllers, they have more eight-way movement instead of the four-way cross movement, that where you have to like press the two buttons at the same time in
yeah.
order to get you the direction. Although to dive into that a little bit, the Genesis and Master System are still four actual contact pads in the back, but the way that the D-pad is created, it's a little bit easier to press the diagonals. Arguably not. It's
And then you got the PlayStation, which was four individual buttons, as
yeah,
opposed to the
exactly.
actual like cross pattern.
Yeah, yeah. And the underneath part had like some sort of weird like T ring underneath it to help like it reposition itself and stuff like that too. So like everybody had their own versions of this, which is kind of interesting because it came from the original 82 Donkey Kong Game and Watch game. But eventually Nintendo would actually work with a company called Nelsonic Industries, and this company did a Game Watch series with Nintendo in the late 80s and early 90s. kind of to the mid 90s actually. And the reason why they worked with them is because in the past, what this company did, now Sonic actually worked on some actual like wristwatch LCD games that had the clock on it, but they also worked and did some games such as like Frogger and Pac-Man, like the Simon game, memory repeat game, Ghostbusters and GI Joe as some examples of their um, game watch games that they produced before they worked with the Nintendo. And then they worked with Nintendo and they released a large amount of these watches actually. There's 4 different Mario watches. There's a Tetris watch. There's a Star Fox one, surprisingly, which looks really interesting. And a Legend of Zelda one, which one of my friends had back in like 92 or 93 whenever that thing came out. He
Wow.
got it for his birthday and I was really envious of it because I'm like, dude, you can play Zelda at school, that's so awesome. Because yeah, none of us really had a Game Boy. So but yeah, it was kind of neat because they had little games on them and they were pretty primitive, but it was still entertaining to say the least. Let's move into Tiger Electronics.
Which we'd kind of mentioned before,
Yeah.
was sort of the I guess like natural evolution of that LCD gaming.
Yeah, because it kind of took the Game and Watch formula and evolved it a little bit,
Yeah,
which is kind of interesting
not
because
much.
they, well, they did
And
and they
arguably
didn't.
devolved in some matter.
Yeah, and then every Tiger Electronics one had different buttons based off of what inputs it would need. Like the Sonic
Yes.
one only had an action button because Sonic only really jumps, and it has 4 direction buttons. There's a Simon's Quest one that has 3 action buttons and the directional buttons, for example. And there's tons of these different
The
Tiger
Ninja
Electronics.
Gaiden that had 2 action buttons.
Yeah. And this company eventually went defunct in 2012.
Good riddance.
But they were really, really popular in the 80s and 90s. And this was likely due to Ian doesn't really like the Tiger Electronics.
Well, I mean, their popularity makes sense because you're looking at a $20 piece of plastic as opposed to like a $50 game cart.
Mhm.
And I mean, as a kid, what's easier to sell? Like,
Yeah.
I want a $50 game,
Es-
but okay,
Especially
fine, I'll
since
take this
like
$20.
I find that these were kind of geared towards like 5 to 10 year olds mainly, and they had more of a simplistic game design to them. They had mainly due to their technology. I was always told to mute the sound on them. I'll admit the sound on them is always friggin' annoying. Um, and although the Konami ones, which aren't Tiger Electronics, but they're kind of the same thing, but just by a different company, they had music in them and they were kind of catchy. Like the Ninja Turtles one actually like played the theme song on the title screen, if I recall
But
correctly.
it was still like beeps and stuff.
Yeah, beeps
Like
and
hype.
bloops.
Yeah, it was not great because I had Blades of Steel,
Hmm.
which was, I would argue that Blades of Steel was better than the Ninja Gaiden that I had,
Hmm.
which was atrocious.
Might have been just a little too difficult
Uh,
because I remember
there's
a
there's
lot of
there's
them.
nothing to the game, and like that's my issue. And it's like you said, like yeah, they were for sure for that like 5 to 10 year old
Hmm.
um kind of age group where your attention
Yeah.
span's a little bit shorter. It's just some flashing lights and stuff happening. But like that's also the thing. It was just nothing. I felt like nothing happened. Like even playing it as a kid, I'm like, well, this is a waste of $20.
Fair. Yeah, I found it interesting that like the first one that I ever got was Simon's Quest, and I had a few of them. And like I said, the first one I got was Simon's Quest, and I thought it was really interesting that because I had Castlevania on the Nintendo,
Yeah.
and I thought it was interesting that they actually had levels to them, and like usually there was like a boss to it, or at least in this game, where there'd be like a skeleton at the end where it had more hit points. Eventually, I never actually beat this game, but I did make it to the Dracula figure on the last level,
Okay.
and it was just it throws so many enemies at you. It's just kind of relentless, and because of its primitive nature, the patterns are a little bit harder to pick up, especially since like sometimes they're sort of random,
Yeah,
or
and
I
it
feel like
feels
they kind of
very
are.
random.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they are. They might just be timed, but yeah, as a kid, they definitely felt random, which made the game more difficult. But yeah, they eventually were bought out by Hasbro, and they were licensed to make a bunch of the Yahoo branding games. Which, if I'm understand correctly, they made like a bunch of the Yahoo branded games on browser and on cell phone, which I found kind of interesting. And I guess that kind of fit
Okay.
because they were sort of they made like simple design game loops and that kind of potentially transitioned over a little bit.
Well, you were saying that they did get kind of advanced because you
Hmm.
had a Duke Nukem game, which
Yeah,
I had never heard. I'd never heard of the Tiger Grips.
yeah. So there was a Grip series of consoles that came out in like 96, 97, or something like that. And it had basically a trigger and uh, action button, which is its action button, and then arrow buttons. And those were the main buttons, and it was just on off, and then the sound on the other side. And it actually was a 3D plane on an LCD screen where it had each tile connected together to connect like rooms, and you would like go into different areas and then have to like focus your gun into certain positions to shoot the aliens and stuff like that. And then like shoot the trigger, and you could hit the option button to cycle in through different guns, and it played like a really simplified like Duke Nukem game, which like I felt it was really impressive because it had multiple levels, and it had a fairly decent challenge on it, and like the room you had to go through the different levels and stuff like that to get to the end. And I don't remember too much about it, but I do remember having a lot of fun with it.
All I know is that you're missing the one key element that makes Duke Nukem Duke Nukem. There was no spacebar. There was no money throw. There was no gentlemen's clubs.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But the good news is eventually Tiger Electronics went out of business. So, but um, that kind of leads us. Well, I mean, we passed it, but
Mhm.
we'll circle back.
Yeah, circle back to like
The
actual
actual
consoles.
consoles.
Hmm.
And the first, well, not technically first, but
The first one we're gonna go over.
the Game Boy. So we're kind of gonna go over some of the what we feel were like major contenders.
Hmm.
I mean, arguably, yeah, this is Nintendo's domain.
Yeah.
But there was some other notable players in here
Hmm.
throughout time. I mean, spoiler alert, Nintendo wins, but there was some really important consoles that were released.
Yeah, some of them definitely innovated a lot more than Nintendo and gave Nintendo a run for their money. But
Yeah.
yeah, so let's start off with the original Game Boy.
Yeah, we'll start off with the kind of beginning.
Hmm.
I mean, it sold 118 million units, which isn't the numbers like arguable because that's 118 million units across its three different or four different iterations,
Yeah.
which we'll talk about in a minute. But it it really revolutionized handheld gaming.
Hmm.
You know, it even though it had the simplistic display with that like greenish like pea
Monochrome.
soup, and then like your various shades of gray.
Hmm. Well, they're like four shades of green. That's basically what it is. It's four shades of green.
Well, it was still enough.
Hmm.
You know, it was simple, um, but they really put in work on it.
Hmm.
You know, you had Nintendo, and then a lot of other third party companies
Yeah.
releasing pretty great games for the system.
Especially like due to the way that Nintendo licensed agreements worked in the 80s and up to like the mid late 90s. Basically anybody who made third party games for the Nintendo or Super Nintendo like worked on a game. If they were a large enough company, they worked on a game for the Game Boy, which is kind of cool because you would always get like the Konami games being ported over, the Square games being ported over from like their main series, whether it be like a Ninja Turtles entry or a Castlevania entry, or the
But
Final
and
Fantasies.
that's the neat thing. Like they weren't just like a port.
Hmm.
Like these were brand new adventures.
Yeah, yeah,
And
built from the ground up with really just influences from the core home console market.
yeah, and you didn't, yes, you didn't get that like home console experience with it.
No, but it's still a passable experience that was really really fun.
Yeah, and it gave you something to play on the go.
Hmm.
That said, yeah, you've got the monochrome dot matrix screen,
Hmm.
which simplistic, but it was really hard to see.
Yeah, that's
You
always
know,
been really my main gripe with the original Game Boy was that
unless you're
like
in
the games
decent
are
lighting.
great, but like even with good lighting, it was very very hard to see. And you could say that about even the color backlit screens that were available around the same time. They were like they were kind of hard to see, and like you generally have like a magnifier on them, or I did. A
But
couple of my friends did, but
this isn't something you could play in the dark. This wasn't like
mhm,
your parents being like, "All right, it's bedtime."
underneath
Cool,
the
like
covers.
yeah, underneath the covers playing this game. No, you could
Yeah.
turn it on
Hmm.
and look at the little red light, but
That was it.
that was it. Yeah, you could not play this in the dark.
Hmm.
Um, which kind of a bummer. I mean, the benefit was that you got pretty decent battery life.
Yeah, that was its major benefit. Because I remember playing games like Pokemon and Final Fantasy Legend, and I could sit there beside the lamp on the couch and just play for hours and not
Yep.
have to worry about having to be plugged into the wall. Although I will admit, on most of the handheld consoles, I did just plug into the wall just because I generally played them at home, unless I was at a friend's house playing while my friend played like a different game or something like that.
Like you mentioned, um, for me, this was like a almost defining experience
Hmm.
because I could lay there on the couch next to the lamp playing Pokemon,
Hmm.
watching cartoons,
Yeah,
and I didn't have to
while
choose
you're
one.
watching Pokemon.
Yeah, like I didn't have to choose one over the other.
Yeah,
I could do both at the same time,
yeah, that's very true.
and that I think that's one of the magical things that handheld gaming offers
Hmm.
is
That's a
that
really good
ability
point.
to really like,
Because I do recall playing many of my different handheld systems while I was watching like a TV show, especially if I had seen the episode before.
yeah,
It was rivaled by a handful of companies, but like we had mentioned before, no one could really dethrone Nintendo
no,
from their overly dominant market share.
no, it was a
And
beast.
their dominance kind of was there throughout all of time and arguably even to today. And many have tried, and some have had more success than others. But yeah, the massive amounts of games over and the enjoyability of those games over the tech and everything else and its limitations kind of just helped Nintendo be able to push forward. And I feel like because they kept the same similar technology for so long, companies were basically forced to innovate, or they innovated maybe through boredom. I'm not sure. That there's like it had been out for so long that it's like, well, oh, cool, I figured out how to do like this neat trick or something like that, or what have you, and then eventually, um, cooler games came out for it and everything.
Yeah, and that was just the thing. Like, it's where as you look at any of the other like handheld consoles that was released,
Mm-hmm.
the special thing about the Game Boy was they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
They would do these like refreshes, which is what you see now in
Yeah.
the home console market. They did that in the handheld market.
Yeah.
Instead of releasing a brand new system, it's okay. Well, here's the Game Boy Pocket,
Mm-hmm.
which it's a little bit smaller,
Right.
but it'll still play all the games.
Yeah.
Here's the Game Boy Light, which was available in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Actually had a backlight.
Yeah.
Um,
Which came out at the same time as the color, which basically
yeah,
evolved the color engine and everything, like allowing almost 24,000 plus colors on the screen at the same time through like using different palettes of like 8x4 and just evolving the tech to be able to make the games more presentable and things like that.
But still, all the while, still playing the same content.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that's the biggest thing, was they had this like massive library. I mean, if you get into the pros and cons of the system,
Yeah,
uh, you're looking at like
one of the largest libraries
it's
there.
huge.
Yeah, it's definitely like the life as a system helped, but I think the simplicity of the technology helped as well because people could just like port a lot of games for it. And due to this simple graphics and there not actually being a backlight being constantly powered here, especially in the early days where we don't have the same like LCD and LED technology that we have now, back then, it allowed for better battery life, which is a big bonus, especially if like you bought this for your kid that you lug around a lot and like it
You
only
just
took
needed four
four.
double A's,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And it
Worst case
was
scenario, you can steal the remote for your TV and VCR.
yeah.
Bam, your
And
kid's playing games.
and although this is kind of laughable now because the original Game Boy is fairly bulky, but in comparison to the other handheld consoles in the early days, and its main competitors, the Game Gear, the Lynx, and the Turbo Express, this was actually significantly slimmer in comparison to those other consoles.
Yeah, I remember this being able to fit in my jeans pocket
hmm
when I rode my bike to the park to play some Pokemon.
Yeah, whereas I had like a shoulder bag
Yeah,
for my Game
I have
Gear.
the same shoulder bag.
Yeah, cool.
But it's, yeah, you didn't need that for that.
hmm
But
Yeah.
I mean, on the opposite side of that, yeah, the graphics and lack of color
Yeah.
were pretty weak.
Yeah, and even like in the later life of the Game Boy Color, where there was very significant color palettes in the graphics, and there's a lot more complexity due to its internal technology. There not being a backlight on it kind of sucked.
Yeah, like I mean, it worked in its benefit for battery life, but
hmm
as far as like actual playability goes, it
Yeah.
kind of tanked it a little bit.
And in parallel with our first point, with it being awesome that there's so many games that, as we know in other consoles such as the
Or
PlayStation,
the
there's
Wii.
or the Wii, there's a lot of bloatware for the
Yeah.
Nintendo. And like I find if you're going to like there's bloatware for every system, but like if you find a bin of Game Boy games, there's generally a lot of duplicates at a retro game store or something like that.
And there's a lot of passable junk.
And yeah, a lot of it.
You got to kind of dig to find the good
And
things.
know what to look for in order to find like good games, which is true with any console really, but this is um, more noticeable on the Game Boy because of just how many games there was for it. But moving on from the Game Boy,
To its probably main competitor of the time.
yeah, and probably one of its most successful competitors.
And because JC's JC, we had to talk about it.
Yep, because this console is amazing. The Game Gear. As we mentioned, during the 90s, this was its major competitor. It sold 10.62 million consoles over its lifetime worldwide. Unfortunately, this console didn't have as much third-party developer support as the Game Boy did, and it was essentially basically Sega and some other companies that worked hand in hand with Sega. And a major reason for this was because of Nintendo's licensing practices,
Yeah.
where if you made a game for Nintendo, you weren't allowed to make that game for another company or a competitor's console. For example, that's a really high level explanation of the specifics of it. It's really interesting if you do a little bit of research into it and how Nintendo was so stringent on this type of stuff. But it's one of the reasons why the Game Gear had a lot less titles, but it did still have a solid number of titles. I think it's like uh, around 400 games for the console.
It's not bad.
But yeah, this console, interesting fact about it is that it's actually basically a portable master system. And it was kind of interesting because a lot of people didn't actually have a master system or access to it, and the Game Gear kind of gave them access to it because there's a lot of games that were for the Master System that were ported over to both the consoles back and forth, and kind of gave them people an experience of what the Master System was like, because the Master System in comparison to the original Nintendo is actually pretty. It's technically superior in some aspects. It has more colors. The sound is pretty much the same, but a little bit better whenever you compare the North American Nintendo to the Master System. Yeah, it's cool because there's even a device that you could plug into it, which could allow you to plug in Master System games, which is actually pretty rare if you want to go looking for it. And it had a interesting number of third-party peripherals as well, such as the TV tuner,
Yep.
which doesn't work anymore, but it was something that seemed cool at the time, though its screen was fairly small to watch television on. But
Yeah,
I
but I
mean,
mean, whatever.
and
Plus, they also like this kind of kept the Master System market in Europe and Brazil going
yeah, exactly,
because
because
they were
they
porting
were available
new
until
Game Gear games
the late
over to the
90s.
Master System.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
in those markets because
Hmm.
it was really popular over there.
Yeah, yeah, and that happened until like the late 90s, and it was kind of neat how it was supported for such a long time and allowed even its like big brother, so to speak, the Master System, to keep its life in the global market a little bit. And yeah, the console's not that similar to the Game Boy.
No.
In that many respects, and its major selling point was that it was color
And backlit.
and it was backlit. Yeah, and the interesting thing about this is that the backlit screen is actually like a fluorescent tube in the back of it, and that takes an incredible amount of power to actually light. And it took six AA
Six
batteries
double A
in
batteries.
comparison to four
And
for
you'd
the Game
get
Boy.
and you get like
Around
4 hours of
4 hours. Yeah.
gameplay.
And a lot of people cite 3 to 5, but I remember my Everready nickel cat rechargeable batteries and would last 4 hours with it. So I got 12 of them, and whenever I would go out, I would have basically 8 hours of playtime in order to play on my console. And if you didn't know what rechargeable batteries were at the time, and you had a Master System, you either were plugged into the wall, paying too much money for batteries, or you learned what rechargeable batteries were really, really quick. I remember a few months after I had gotten the Game Gear for Christmas the one year with the Sonic 2 bundle. It was a couple months after, and I had got like a charger with a bunch of batteries because I would go through the batteries so quickly, and I would always take my uh, uh, like the wall plug with me. And if there wasn't a wall plug with me, then I didn't have any batteries. Like, we didn't have the money to constantly buy batteries, so it's just a
Yeah,
wise
that was
investment
I
to.
know when I had mine, I basically took my wall plug with me
Hmm.
everywhere and then hoped I could plug it in
Yeah.
because yeah, I usually had whatever batteries were in it.
Hmm.
We never really had rechargeable batteries as a kid.
Yeah.
So yeah, hope for the best.
Hope for the best for sure.
I want to try to get as many levels of Sonic 2 as I can or
Yeah.
play as many games of World Series baseball.
Yep. Which is a great sports game. But both Genesis and Game Gear versions. But yeah, this was one of my major consoles. Growing up from the early '90s to the late '90s, I was still playing this game because like they was still releasing games for it, and always picking up new used games for it at
Yeah.
the stores and stuff like that, and always finding great games for it over the years. And yeah, I probably played this as much as my Genesis because, like, as we mentioned before, this was what I was playing, like, while I was watching cartoons or at my friends while, like, they were on, like, the Super Nintendo or something like that, so that we could both play a game together, especially if the game wasn't two players or something like that. Like, we
Yeah.
were, like, taking turns playing SimCity or something like that. And yeah, definitely got a life out of the system. And yeah, this had some pretty bland games for it, just like any other console, but it does have a lot of heavy hitters that outshine many other games that people unfortunately never really played. And
Well, that's the thing. When you have a smaller game library, you're
mhm,
obviously going to have a lot more bangers than you will
yeah,
if it's like a huge library. Like,
hmm
y yeah, you're more likely to have those big hits.
yeah. Yeah, I highly recommend that if you've never played a Game Gear, to definitely look into it and
Yeah.
look at some top lists of different people's Game Gear lists and things like that. And I'm sure that you'll find some great games that you'll enjoy. Some of them are available on the Virtual Console, and you can also get them through some Sonic collections throughout the years. Hopefully, they'll release some for like the Switch and stuff like that eventually whenever they get around to it. And yeah, I
Yeah,
it's
we wanted to throw out like, and we will
mhm.
throw out some like top selling games for the various consoles.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're just not really able to do that for
No,
this.
we looked and they're like Sega is super tight lipped
Yeah.
about that. They just don't. Yeah, I mean, and
I'm
that's a common thing with Sega too. Unless
yeah,
they do
really
incredibly
well.
well,
hmm
they keep things pretty under wraps.
Although I am sure that Sonic 2 is probably its best-selling game, and I say that because Sonic 2 was the packing game for years.
Yeah,
And although there was a packing game with like a lot of the different Disney games and stuff like that, and yeah, I'm sure Sonic 2 is up in at least the top three or something like that. But let's go into some pros and cons to finish up.
graphics, man.
Yeah, the graphics are amazing. Especially like, the screen was small, but I used this Nikon magnifying glass adapter, and it made the screen about twice as large.
Okay.
And it like I used it constantly, and it was fairly functional. And yeah, the graphics are just amazing. They look like just the Master System, which is like graphically a little bit better than the Nintendo. And it was in your hands and portable and on the go. And there's another thing that I really liked about this console was that its form factor. It looks weird if you compare it to some other ones because a lot of them are like vertical rectangles, and this is a horizontal rectangle. But it was a little bit more comfortable because your
Yeah.
hands weren't like cramped together. Like I know, like especially with the SP, it's so close together that like I don't know how people play that for hours on end without getting like cramped hands. Um,
Tiny hands, my friend, tiny hands.
yeah,
Uh,
but I felt that the console was fairly ergonomic and comfortable to play. And
Plus, like ultimately, because this was based 100% on the Master System,
mhm,
this actually gave you that home console experience that
yeah,
you weren't gonna get on the Game Boy. You
hmm
just couldn't.
yeah, yeah. And like I said, there's an adapter that you can get, although it's rarer and harder to find and a little bit more expensive. You plug it into the back of your Game Gear, and then it allows you to plug in a Master System cartridge, and it just converts it for you because
Yeah,
it's literally like basically the same technology.
because in classic Sega technology, you have to plug something into something to make it something else.
Tower of Power.
Why not? Um, but on the opposite side of that, you did have that limited game library.
Yeah, it was a little bit larger than some other portable consoles because its life was around for so long. But like in North America specifically, like they gave up support sooner than they did in other regions.
Yeah.
And the library is definitely more limiting for sure. And like I mentioned, the batteries are gonna die, so you better get that wall plug or learn what rechargeable batteries are, or be extremely rich and well off in order to buy six AA batteries every 4 hours because you're gonna go through them really quickly. And that's mainly due to that fluorescent bulb on the back of the thing. And
Yeah.
what's interesting about this is I've actually looked at modding the Game Gear, and you can put in like a modern LCD screen with modern LED lights like backlit, and it's like 4 to 5 times more battery life than the actual OG stock backlight, which is phenomenal
Yeah.
because like
It's
it,
basically a Game Gear or Game Boy.
yeah, at that point, which
That
is
basically cancels one of the main arguments.
exactly, yeah. And an important thing to note if you're ever going to start collecting in the Game Gear is that there's something called capacitor plague that affected a lot of capacitors in the late 80s and early 90s. And what this basically means is the longevity of the actual capacitors aren't as good as some of the higher brand capacitors because they
Yeah,
tended to use
they had a
lower
real high
brand.
fail rate in the late 80s, early 90s.
This is also a problem in the early 2000s as well, where a lot of electronic companies just use lower grade capacitors instead of the higher grade ones, either to reduce costs or just because some companies just don't care.
I mean,
But
probably that first one.
yeah, just the reduced cost thing. So if you're gonna buy the actual original hardware, you're gonna want to look at getting one that's been recapped, which is gonna cost you a little bit more money. Or if you have some soldering skills, to buy the actual like pack of all the capacitors and then do it yourself. It's about an intermediate difficulty for like a skill set of a soldering skill
Or
set.
just suffer through your super dim screen.
Well, sometimes the sound will just not work anymore because of
Also
this
that.
issue, and
Yikes.
or the screen just won't even turn on. If you have power and the screen won't turn on, or you don't have sound, it's like 9 times out of 10 because the capacitors are dead. Like I said, it's a fairly easy fix, but it's not just like resoldering. It's a lot more complex than resoldering a battery. You have to be able to like look at a circuit board and stuff. So intermediate difficulty, but it's doable. If you're not comfortable, definitely ask a friend who is more comfortable with those types of things. One last con. I mentioned before, one of the reasons why it had so few games is because of Nintendo's licensing practices during the 90s. Really interesting topic. Maybe we'll go into a little bit more detail in a different episode, but like I said, high level, if you made games on the Nintendo, it was very hard to make games on a different console. You couldn't just port over the exact same game effectively, and that limited companies wanting to work with other companies such as Sega and the NEC TurboGrafx and stuff like that, which just hurt some other companies due to that practice. Yeah, let's go on to
Yeah, there's a
more
couple.
consoles.
Yeah, because there was a couple honorable mentions, I guess. I mean, there's so many of them,
Yeah,
especially during this time period. But
and these are
there's
kind of like the other like major, uh, like the others, like you said,
yeah,
that they're
I don't
like.
even know if these were major, but these were others, and they were we kind of found them notable.
Hmm.
I mean, me personally, this first one, I do have a personal attachment to it
Yeah.
because I think this was my first handheld system,
Hmm.
and that's the Atari Lynx. Um, I I actually bought it because at the time it was cheaper than everything else, probably
Right.
because they were trying to clear it out. And again, like I think I bought this and like four games for what it would have cost me to get a Game Gear.
Right.
And the neat thing about the Lynx was it was actually the first 16-bit handheld.
Hmm.
And
Which is
even
pretty impressive.
and well, but even more mind-blowing than that, this released 2 months after the original Game Boy.
Wow, that's actually kind of interesting.
Most of the other things didn't release until at least a year later. Like the Game Gear was a year after
Yeah, it was about
this.
a year. Yeah.
So, yeah, this came right after your like
Most popular. Yeah.
monochrome Game Boy,
With four colors.
and this was full 16-bit in your
Hmm.
hand.
Yeah.
Uh,
And it was backlit as well.
it was backlit as well. It had this really cool feature where you could flip it if you were left-handed. I mean, I don't think anyone ever did because I don't think using. I mean, all controllers are set up to be a certain way,
Yeah.
right? So I don't
But
think
my
anyone
friend's
ever flipped.
left-handed, and it was weird because I actually think that the controller. I don't know where I remember reading or hearing this, but I think Japanese game developers actually flip the buttons to be on the directional buttons to be on the left side to make it more difficult for right-handed people, and so
Okay.
technically it's easier an advantage for left-handed people because you need that twitch reaction to be able to move and stuff like that. And if you're left-handed, you'd be more averse to like using
I
this hand
mean,
versus this hand.
yeah.
I don't know. I tend to feel that like controller is a controller, and you're just going to be ambidextrous whenever you're using it. But that could just be me because I'm
Yeah.
slightly ambidextrous except for writing. So
But the now I had the Model 2, which came out a little bit later.
hmm
So it actually had like a rubberized grip
yeah, that
on
model
it,
looks a
which
little
was
cooler too.
it was super comfortable to hold. You had a light a backlight option.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were in a well lit room, you could turn off the backlight
Right.
and save some battery life.
Mm-hmm.
Or I mean, whatever, you're probably plugged into a wall because it did use a bunch of batteries.
Mm-hmm.
I think the main issue with this was that you had a really small game library.
Really small game library.
Like this was discontinued in, I want to say, 96.
Yep.
And you had 76 games. You had
Mm-hmm.
73 that were released over its lifetime
Mm-hmm.
and 3 that were released after it was discontinued.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Now, I mean, granted that the games that I had, I really enjoyed. I think being an Atari system, they were pretty much all Atari developed games,
Mm-hmm.
which probably was another, like, I guess downfall to the system was
Yeah, they
you
kind of have
have
the
one
same problem with
developer, you
this.
don't have all the third party.
Yeah, it's the similar problem that all the other consoles had due to Nintendo's licensing policies.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't even think it was necessarily their licensing policies. I think it was just Atari being Atari.
Maybe.
But I mean, ultimately, they thought that the home console market was the way to go, so they were just like,
Yeah.
done with this. The
Let's work on this.
Jaguar's what's gonna make us millions.
Yeah. With a VR headset that never came
Yikes.
out.
Yikes. But yeah, I mean, if ever you have the opportunity to try out an Atari Lynx, it's a really interesting system. It has one of the worst Batman games ever available for it, but also some really, really great games.
Yeah.
So,
I find the Gauntlet game an interesting story because they had developed a beta or prototype of the Gauntlet, which I think was almost complete, but they never actually officially released it, if I recall correctly. And I think it was supposed to be 4 players because this had
oh yeah, that was
connectivity
the
to
other
between
thing.
the other players, and
This
it's neat
could
'cause-
play up to 16 people,
right.
allegedly.
Mm-hmm. I don't know
Um,
how well that would work, but they had games that worked up to 8.
Yeah, they had one game that had 8-player co-op.
Mm-hmm.
It had a really awkward name.
Yeah, Todd's Adventures in Slime World.
There we go. Todd's Adventures in Slime World.
Yeah.
But it did have 8-player co-op, and I think that was the first like recorded 8-player co-op game.
Right.
I don't think anything else had done that at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, kind of cool.
Yeah, that's definitely kind of cool. But
If you and 7 other friends can find Atari Lynxes, plus the link cables, plus 8 copies of Todd's Adventures in Slime World,
let
you
us
guys
know.
have way more money than I do. But
make a video, send us a link.
yeah, but one other.
Yeah, this one's really interesting. It's the Turbo Express. And this was released in 1990, and it's very similar to the Game Gear in the fact that how the Game Gear was 100% kind of based off of the Master System technology, or 90% based off the Master System technology. This was like 100% just the TurboGrafx 16 in your hands.
This is crazy. I had never heard of this.
Yeah, it's a really cool system, and unfortunately, it's super expensive, so it's kind of hard to get. But the TurboGrafx 16 uses Hue cards, and which are little tiny credit cards, which I've shown on the episode before. And like this is Kadesh. It's just a small small card, and you literally could just take this and then plug it into the back of the Turbo Express, and it worked just like the TurboGrafx 16, and you could link them together, and yeah, it was 100% the exact same technology. For the most part, it's gonna. I know there's different battery mods you can get for it to help its battery life, but you at the time you're basically going to plug it into the wall. I've met one person who had this, and it was pretty insane being able to play like Bonk's Adventure and stuff like that on
For like 20 minutes.
Yeah, on the, I don't know how long it lasts, but on the Turbo Express, but like its major downfall and interesting thing about it is that and I don't really think this overly helped. It was really 2 things. It's that the game library, it had no unique games. It was just what was released on the TurboGrafx 16. So that definitely it kind of helped and didn't help at the same time, I think. And also, if you looked at the original MSRP, this is 249.99 US. in for comparison's sake, this was more expensive than the home consoles,
Yeah, this is gonna cost you
considerably.
$50 more than the home console.
Uh, yeah, because the Genesis was 189.99, and the TurboGrafx 16 itself, and the Nintendo and Super Nintendos, whenever they were launched, were 199.99. And yeah, I don't think this helped because it was effectively like just a TurboGrafx 16, which was $50 cheaper, that was portable, which had bad battery life, and like although like a really neat system, like yeah,
I mean,
I don't know.
probably by the time that this was a little bit more easily available, you could probably pick up a TurboGrafx 16 for like $5 at a Radio Shack.
Yeah, the I don't know about $5, but they
I
they
mean,
definitely were discounted to
they started
$100 and then 50
pushing them
bucks.
out pretty low. I mean,
Yeah, and so this device, although its legacy and idea was really cool, that it
yeah.
truly built a console that was one to one to the current technology, but making it portable instead of the previous generations that was portable, like the Game Gear, was eventually discontinued in 1994. So it didn't have an overly long life cycle, but then again.
Neither
Those
did the TurboGrafx 16.
not in North America.
Yeah.
It was the top selling console for quite a while in Japan. Actually, the PC Engine, its Japanese counterpart. But yeah, those are some of the other portable console.
I guess like semi competition for the Game
Mhm.
Boy, which they tried. Um,
Yeah.
but
Although they did innovate a little bit better than Nintendo, certainly
true.
earlier,
Absolutely.
they missed the mark with the home audiences, where Nintendo kind of did better in that regard. But let's kind of come back full circle, and let's talk a little bit more about the Nintendo evolution. And we already kind of went over some of it whenever we were talking about the core Game Boys, where it had the again the Game Boy Light, the Game Boy Color,
Game Boy Pocket.
Game Boy Pocket, and let's go into
Well, we got the Game Boy Advanced.
yeah.
That was our first like actual new Game Boy system.
And this was like I never actually really liked the Game Boy like at all. I liked its games and I wanted to play its games, but then whenever the Game Boy Advance came out, I was all of a sudden interested again because it reminded me more of the Game Gear, and I was
Yeah.
like, this is really cool. I was a pretty big fan of the Game Boy Advance. That's whenever I jumped over
Yeah.
to that, and it came out in 2001. I think I got mine in 2000 and early 2002, and
It's kind of funny cuz I didn't know this came out.
mhm.
It was kind of like it was a bit of a weird time in my life. But I'd gone over to the UK and I'd met an aunt I had never met ever.
Cool.
She gave me £300,
Right.
which I'm like, this is crazy.
Yeah, especially with
And
the conversion rate.
yeah, and my parents were like, well, maybe you should hold on to that until you get home. And I was like, nope, I'm gonna spend that here. And there was a game shop in town,
Cool.
so I went down there and I was like looking at stuff, and I'm like, oh, like everything is PAL.
Hmm.
Like any of the PlayStation 2 games are PAL. So
Yeah.
there's no point in me picking these up because I can't play them at home. And then I see a Game Boy Advance and I was like, oh man, this is really cool. I'd never seen one. And it was in 2001 when I was there.
Hmm.
And yeah, I'm like, okay, I'll take this. I bought like 3 games. I think I picked up like Golden Sun, Tony Hawk 3, and Castlevania.
Awesome.
And like this got me right back into gaming.
Right.
I want to say it took 2 AA batteries,
Yeah, it did.
and the battery life was pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
Like it didn't have a backlight, which was a huge bummer.
That was my biggest gripe about the Game Boy Advance,
Yeah.
especially coming from the Game Gear like previously, was that I did have a Game Boy to play Pokemon in the interim of that and some other big hitters like Zelda and some of the Final Fantasy titles and Harvest Moon. But anyway, was that it didn't have a backlight. That didn't make any sense to me because
No,
it's like
it should have had a backlight.
you're finally like it was effectively like a Super Nintendo in your hands,
Basically.
and it's like if this had a backlight, it would be so much better, like so much better. But then 2 years later, it did.
It did, and that was a huge turning point for me
Yeah.
because like yeah, I played my Game Boy Advance. I had an absolute blast with it while I was in the UK because we took a lot of trains places.
Yep.
If you're on a 3-hour train ride, like yeah, this was ideal.
For
Like
sure.
you could just keep going, and
Yeah.
all I needed was 2 extra batteries with me on the off chance that it died.
Yeah.
So when 2 years later the SP came out,
Yeah.
that was like my return to handheld gaming. Like that fully pulled me in. I was totally sold. I think I picked up that, and I grabbed like I think a couple other games, probably Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. And from that point on, I don't think I have not had a handheld gaming console on my nightstand. It
Cool.
is there every night. And you know what? It's perfect because some mornings you kind of like wake up, you're like, I don't want to get out of bed, but I kind of want to play video games.
Right.
You can grab it, play for like an hour.
Yep.
You can play for like 3 hours. At this point, I mean, the
Or 8.
experiences that you're delivering are fantastic.
Yeah.
But you don't have to get out of bed. And it's like I said earlier, you can like have something on TV, and if it's not a game that's like super engaging,
Yep.
or a lot of like Twitch reflexes, you can be doing both things at once.
Yeah.
Or if my wife is watching something on TV that I don't care about,
Yep.
I'm not totally out of it. I'm mostly paying attention, and I'm pretty much being a good husband by watching something that doesn't need to be watched. But yeah, like this is that was the turning point right there, was the SP.
Yeah.
That ability to play, and like I took it everywhere because it was like a wallet.
Yeah, and what was really interesting about this is it had a built-in rechargeable battery. It had a backlight with various like brightness settings.
Yeah, to like adjust your battery time.
Exactly, and you can even shut it off too.
Yep.
And like if you're in a brightly lit area, you might not necessarily need it on.
Yeah, if you're playing a game like Boktai where you have to be outside.
It did receive some criticism due to it not having a headphone jack, which I found kind of silly. And that, and also that it was like it was really small, and
It was.
like most of the games that I had been playing on the Game Boy Advance, like version 1, were role playing games, and I honestly felt that the original version was more suited for longer play sessions. That would be like what I was doing with role playing games and stuff like that. But that's a personal gripe that I had with the SP.
Yeah,
but
I
still,
didn't have any
it
massive
was
issues with long playtime.
the Game Boy Advance player for the GameCube really fixed all the issues I had with it. So yeah, but
But
anyway.
that lasted a couple of years, and then ta-da, like the biggest thing yet.
Yeah, the Game & Watch returned.
No, the Nintendo DS. The Nintendo DS. This was like it, man. Like
Yeah.
this was I mean, yeah, you're kind of right. The Game & Watch did return because this brought us 2 screens.
Yeah.
Similar to the Game & Watch, except you had 2 good screens, one of which was a touch screen.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was really interesting with the development of the touch screen on the bottom side. And I always wondered why they didn't actually make both of them touchscreen. And I figured that the next iteration of the like DS technology would have both screens touchscreen, or just one larger screen that was touchscreen, for example. But
I think it was
yeah.
a tech limitation, to be totally honest. Like
It's
if you looked at
probably
if you looked
budget.
at the bottom touch screen, it was definitely different than the top display screen. It did have like it had
It was a little
stuff
bit
in there
smaller. Yeah.
to actually
And
like
you could always
register the
see the
touch.
grid.
Yeah.
If you looked really closely, especially on the DS Lite, the grid was really noticeable. I never had the
Oh,
first model.
it was just as noticeable.
Oh, okay.
But also, this had backwards compatibility,
Yeah, that was the biggest selling point for
and like
me.
it was again, just like the game we didn't mention it before, but the Game Boy Advance could play Game Boy games.
Hmm.
This could also play Game Boy Advance games and Game Boy games.
Yeah, which is really cool. And that's both the DS and the DS Lite version. And you bought the original DS on launch, didn't you?
I did. I bought a DS Fat on launch
Hmm.
day, and I was so underwhelmed.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think,
that's the main reason why I didn't pick up the DS, because like I was still getting, they surprisingly still released some Game Boy Advance games for a while into the DS's life, so I was
yep,
pretty content,
yeah, they did.
and I waited until the DS Lite,
It's
but
funny because like it for me, the DS actually took quite a while to hit its stride with me.
yeah,
I mean, when it hit hard, and
yeah,
I was like, again,
yeah.
sold.
I had the feeling whenever I finally got my system where it's like, oh man, I wish I had been playing this for the last like year because there's a lot of really great games. But like the original launch titles in North America for the DS, like Fat, there isn't very many of them. Like
No,
the only
I
one
mean,
I would have wanted to get was probably Mario
and
64.
that's the funny thing. Like, I had Mario 64, and I was just like, I played it for probably an hour.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, this sucks, and I took it out, and I think I just used my DS as a
Game
my
Boy.
new like Game Boy Advance. Yeah, like
Yeah,
that's it. Just became that
yeah.
until I
It was
think
cool because you could play this Game Boy Advance games on the top screen or the bottom screen, which is kind of neat.
yeah, you could flip it, which
Mm-hmm.
was again kind of neat, and like um, it was. I mean, to me, it was a huge selling feature of the console because anywhere you went, you could take two games with you,
Mm-hmm.
which you couldn't really do
Yeah.
without lugging extra cases and that kind of stuff.
And
This
some
you
of the
could
games
still have the
actually
two.
interfaced with the Game Boy Advance cart. For example, Harvest Moon DS or Harvest Moon Cute works with Friends of Mineral Town Harvest Moon games and more Friends of Mineral Town,
Oh,
the Game Boy Advance games. They actually bring in NPCs from the Friends games into the DS Harvest Moon games,
oh,
which
that's
is
kind
pretty
of
cool.
cool.
I think there's a couple other games that had similar tech,
There
but
was.
they're.
It's funny you mentioned that because there was Lunar Nights,
Mhm.
which came out on the DS, um, which was a kind of like spiritual successor to the Boktai games, which I have
Yep.
mentioned before and once like once already this episode.
Yep.
And it would let you use the solar sensor
Mhm.
in those cartridges.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I mean, you didn't have to, but it was a neat little addition.
But yeah, the DS eventually evolved into the 3DS, which kind of upgraded its internals, much like the internals from the Game Boy Pocket to the Game Boy Color, where it had better internal architecture. And also, it had an interesting feature, which I find most people turned off, but it was
Yep.
like the top screen was 3D and it didn't require glasses, which is kind of neat because it used some sort of like rotoscoping technology effectively of like showing sort of two layers on the one screen so that it basically ended up being 3D to the viewer.
As long as you were looking at it at the right angle.
Yeah.
If you were looking at it from slightly off, it just looked like garbage.
Mhm. And you know, at a glance, they have a very similar feature set, but the screens were bigger, especially with the XL version that was eventually released as a re-revision of the 3DS.
Well, that was, and again, that's like their shtick.
Mhm.
Because I mean, even with the original DS, we had the DS Lite,
Mhm.
and then we had the DSi.
No, we didn't. That sucks. It got rid of the GBA port. Doesn't exist.
I know, but that
So
but that even got us the DSi XL,
yeah,
which was our first XL handheld,
that's true.
and then we ended up getting the 3DS.
Yeah.
We got the new 3DS,
Hmm. The
new
2DS.
new 3DS XL, 2DS,
Yeah.
um,
Which was the XL size.
new TDS, 2DS XL.
Yeah, which is the one I have.
Yeah, like that same like, oh, we're just gonna keep like making different versions of the same thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like this is kind of, if you think about it, it seems like this is kind of where the whole idea of the console revisions came from. Although like this original Sega and Nintendo had
Yeah.
multiple console revisions, but like they've always been doing this type of thing, but they really do a lot of them in the console, in the portable console market.
Yeah, like Nintendo's notorious for it. But
Hmm.
this did actually have one really important feature.
Yes, it did. The little analog stick.
Yeah,
Hmm.
which it wasn't the first time it was done,
No,
but
because the PSP had one.
it did. But I think that was the best time it was done. To me,
Yeah, I don't know.
this analog stick is it's fantastic. Like it's yeah.
I got so used to the PSPs that it
The
doesn't bother
PSP
me.
was like a nub, and we will get to the PSP. We'll talk about it
Hmm.
in a minute. But this is actually a comfortable thumbstick.
Its movement is more comfortable. I'd agree with that, but I don't know. I find it's basically the same, except for its like
Nah, man.
rotation and precision's a little bit better.
But again, I bought the 3DS on launch day,
Cool.
which again, it's like I would never learn from my mistakes. Because I was disappointed with this as well.
Yeah. Other than the Game Boy Advanced, for all of the Nintendo portable consoles, I have always gotten into the um like into them at a later revision. Like
Yeah.
once a bunch of games have come out that I know that I'm gonna like buy a huge backlog for and maybe get through a third of them. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
'cause like I got the 2DS XL because like I didn't really care about the 3D feature. My friend had a 3DS and like I had played the 3DS a little bit and saw its feature set and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, it's
well,
still
there
getting.
was a couple things that I really liked about the original 3DS, like
Hmm.
just changes that they had made to the system. It did look it. It's gonna sound weird to say, but it actually looked like an adult system.
Okay.
Like it looked like a little notepad, it looked like a little like notebook.
Hmm. So did the DS Lite though. That's what I
Yeah,
liked about that one.
it was a more sleek design.
Hmm.
The stylus was actually a metal stylus.
Was it?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
and it was retractable,
Yeah. See, the
so
one
you
that
could
I got with the
extend it.
2DS
Is
is
plastic.
plastic and it's only
Yeah,
like this
because
big. It's so annoying.
I've got one for the 3DS XL,
Oh, okay.
which again is plastic,
Hmm.
whereas this was an extendable metal
See, I
stylus.
don't mind it being plastic. I don't like it being this big.
I don't. I thought the metal one was great. I mean
Hmm.
the 3D. Yeah, I had it on for like an hour playing Pilot Wings, and then I'm like, well, this is. Eh. I played around with the AR cards that come with it and the little like AR games,
Cool.
and I put those away and never looked at them again. Like we said before, we were going to mention some of the top selling titles for this,
Hmm.
and now we're going to cover all of the Game
Yeah.
Boy
Yeah,
releases.
the top selling one for each of the Game Boys.
Starting chronologically with the Game Boy,
Hmm.
with Pokemon Red and Blue
Yep.
at
That makes a lot of sense. I thought it was Tetris, but then I was surprised that it was Red and Blue. But I think Tetris is like 1 million less
yeah,
copies.
this was what 31.37 million,
Yeah.
and Tetris want to say was 30.26.
Okay.
So it was just a million and a bit.
Hmm.
But that's still not bad,
Yeah, that's
all
pretty
things
good.
considered.
Yeah. And then like knowing the winner of the Game Boy Advanced top seller is not too hard to figure out. It's another Pokemon game, but didn't sell as many copies surprisingly. I felt that this one might have been a little bit more popular, but then Pokemon hit us by storm and was a very huge phenomena.
Yeah.
Ruby and Sapphire at 15.85 million was the top Game Boy Advance seller. And the Nintendo DS one was uh, almost as much as the OG Game Boy sales of 29.73 million of the new Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah, it's
And
pretty big.
being a huge fan of the 2D and 2.5D style Mario games over the 3D Mario games, this is one of my top three Mario games for sure. This, if you like those types of games and you haven't played any of the renditions of the new Super Mario Brothers, I'd definitely check them out.
And then rounding out the list for the 3DS, we had Mario Kart 7
Hmm.
at 18.11 million. Now, I mean, that number still could go up because they are still selling them. But,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
There's still a few games
you
being
probably
made,
won't
and
sell
I
another
think they're
like
just
12 million.
no, probably not. I think the last few heavy hitters for the 3DS have been released, and then now it's just a few indie games, and then some games that might just be finishing their development. But time will tell, and people will eventually fully move over to the Switch. So, yeah. So let's move on to the second instance where Nintendo had a large amount of competition in the handheld market
Yeah, this
from
was really its
Sony.
biggest competition,
Yeah,
period. And that would be the PSP.
yeah, and its iterations. So the PSP sold 80.82 million units, which is pretty insane because like the previous largest competitor to Game Gear only sold 10 million.
Yeah, like this is actually, it actually competes.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. And the first revision of it was the PSP 1000, which was released in 2005. And yeah, this brought Sony to the handheld market. And from what I recall, this had a lot of hype behind it, both in like publications and magazines.
yep.
Um,
I bought this guy
and
day one.
cool.
I was super excited.
Yeah, a lot of my friends and myself talked about the console, and were definitely really interested in how well it would do. And quite a few of us actually did end up getting it because it looked very, very promising.
Yep.
The interesting thing about this is that it wasn't uniquely sold as a gaming console. It was actually sold as like a multimedia device. This was kind of like Sony's way of marketing a lot of things because like the PS2, for example, was sold as a multimedia device as well because it had a DVD player in it.
It did, but it didn't have like a menu system. This actually had like
Yeah.
a menu.
Yeah, I really like the crossbar menu system. It's really simple and effective. I know a
Yep.
lot of people don't necessarily like it because it's been designed to something much better for the PS4 interface, but you can still see the DNA of the cross media bar in the PS4 even.
But this kind of let you could have whatever you wanted on there.
Mm-hmm.
Really, like you could have your photos.
Yep.
Um, you could have music.
Mm-hmm. Browse the internet.
You could browse the internet.
Yep.
I mean, you wouldn't want to, but you could.
Yeah.
Um,
I did it for quick things because it was better than like my phone. It actually had a browser on it, where my phone was just like
well, yeah,
some.
back then your phone
Yeah,
really didn't have a browser,
yeah, exactly.
and
Yeah.
yeah, but you could also play movies on this.
Hmm.
If you could either have them downloaded on the memory card,
Hmm.
or
Or the
you could
UMD
you could
disc.
buy UMD discs.
Yeah, and I find this interesting because I use this system as my portable MP3 player, or AC3 digital player, and before I had a Sony DNE20 Walkman, and that's what I had used for a really long time, and its previous models, and I could basically burn AC3s onto a disc and have a really um, uh, long playlists and multiple different CDs and stuff like that, um, compressed on the actual Walkman itself. And this actually was an interesting, smooth transition over where I could just take the same files that I'd already grabbed from my CDs and stuff like that, um, all over to the PlayStation Pocket, and I like plugged it into my car and like brought it with me wherever I went because it would fit like in my coat pocket and stuff like that. And yeah, just had my headphones on and use it as like my MP3 player basically instead of having like an iPod or a Zune or something like that because it had the ability to hold a lot of songs and stuff like that on it, and it was pretty good technology.
Yeah, and I mean like on the gaming side,
Hmm.
this had online multiplayer
Yeah,
out of the box.
and local area like network players as
Yeah,
well. Yeah,
yeah, it was.
just like the Nintendo like DS had as well. The PSP was basically a PlayStation 2 in your hands, which is pretty insane.
Yeah,
Kind of in between PS1 and PS2, closer to the PS2 side, but its technology was like vastly superior to basically anything else out there that was portable at the time, which is pretty impressive. And yeah, as we mentioned, it used these UMD disks, and they could hold 1.8 gigabytes of storage in comparison to the mini discs on the GameCube, which actually only held 1.5 gigabytes of storage. And it's interesting that it could actually hold a little bit more. You generally didn't have any games that would be multi-disc. I think there's a couple of them, but most of them would basically just be limited to that near 2 gigabytes of information.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the format of it was basically just your PlayStation controller without the L2 and R2 buttons. And it had the analog stick or the nub below the D-pad. It had a great D-pad, but the stick it was a little bit awkward to use. It took a little bit while to get used to. But using it for games, action adventure games like Crisis Core or Untold Legends and stuff like that, it was really effective to use versus a D-pad.
Yep.
Or it's different first-person shooters, which kind of really led to a lot of those styles of games to be produced on the PSP. Eventually, a PSP 2000 would come out. That's the model that I eventually got. I didn't get this console initially, but I got the PSP mainly because I love the feature of the extra functionality of the cable you could buy, which was a component cable that allowed you to connect to a television. Because my computer monitor actually had a built-in TV card, and I could plug in composite or component cables and S-video cables into it, and then display them on my computer monitor instead of on the television. And this is how I played like 3/4 of my PSP gaming on. The other quarter was at college. And yeah, and I thought this was a really big selling point of the console, and it consumed a lot of my time due to its extra functionality of the MP3 player. I never really got into the UMD movies, and just a really great high tech portable console that has some pretty good games on it. But let's go into the pros and cons of it. Some of the pros being that it's multifunctionality that I just went over. It doesn't just play games. PSP 2000 onwards have a TV out functionality. So the 2000, the 3000, and the PSP
Go.
Go, which doesn't have a UMD disc, and everything was downloads, kind of a precursor, a foreshadowing, if you will, to where gaming is moving to. And the companies are constantly trying to get us to move towards diskless and
Entirely digital.
entirely digital platform. And also the graphics were superior. Some of the cons, the 1000 version was a tad bulky in comparison to the 2000, which was nice and slim. And the load times were actually fairly slow. This was something that attracted me from getting a 1000 initially. It actually had half the amount of RAM that the 2000 and the 3000 and the Go had, which had double the amount of RAM. Which helped the load times a lot, and especially the PSP Go, because it didn't have the UMD discs. It had that extra RAM that all the newer revisions had. So with the combinations of reading everything off of the memory card and the extra RAM, the load times were actually really good in comparison to the original. And the UMD tech, I've mentioned a couple times, I worked at EB Games for a year and a half, 2 years, and we actually, because the discs are so easily scratched, or just people don't really take care of them, the little metal pin in the middle can fall out, and if it's not like properly sealed onto the actual disc, it makes spinning the disc a little bit harder. And if they scratch, they're really hard to read because some PSP's lasers are super sensitive on reading the discs. So we actually always had a PSP behind the counter to test any game trade-ins for PSP games to see if they would actually boot and load into the game and play, because it was such a big problem that people were returning broken PSP games because they just wouldn't read. So that's definitely something to be concerned about. And also the laser of the readers can die, so you might have to they do tend to die on some of the earlier models. And the last thing of a con is probably the biggest one in my opinion is the proprietary memory cards. So they didn't use actual SD cards. They were basically reformed plastic to their Magic Duo cards made by Sony, and they were twice as expensive, maybe three times as expensive. The larger cards, like I think I have an 8 gig card, and that was super expensive for the time. And yeah, they're really really expensive, and you needed them if if you use the system like as much as like I did, or if you had a lot of games, or if you even downloaded games, because you could download PlayStation One classic games, or just download brand new games.
Indie games.
Indie games and things like that from the PlayStation Store, and your memory card would fill up, and you would need to buy these because the one that the game came out with was like 64 megs or 512 megs, like depending on your pack-in. Like it wasn't that large. You definitely were buying an extra. It was an added hidden cost essentially.
Yeah.
Um, the the system's best-selling games though, um, GTA Liberty City Stories at 7.67 million. Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, I thought this would be the top-selling game to be honest with you, but it sold 5.47 million.
But when you see the third
Third
best
one,
selling, it kind of makes sense what the first best selling would be, which was
yeah.
GTA Vice City Stories
Mhm.
at what, 5 point,
03.
at 5.03 million.
Mhm. Yeah. And this was eventually upgraded to the PSP Vita, which really it was kind of like closer to PlayStation 3 technology, where like the PSPs were just before the PS2 technology. The Vita I feel was like just before the PS3 technology.
It still had some fantastic games,
Mhm.
and it did have some innovation. Like the the thumbstick for this was pretty good.
Mhm.
It wasn't just a nub,
Yeah, I feel
and
like they kind of fixed that problem with the PSP Go.
yeah, oh yeah, they really did. But you also had dual touchscreens. So
Mhm.
you had the front touchscreen, and then on the back, you also had a touch capability as well,
Right.
which was neat because there was some games that would use the pinch feature.
Mhm.
But they also scrapped UMDs, which was a
Yeah.
huge bonus, and actually went to cartridges,
Mhm.
which is a huge surprise for Sony
Yeah.
because they've always been a huge supporter of disc-based games.
Yeah, and new disc media.
But this was very much um, cartridge
Yeah.
and memory sticks.
Mhm. Yeah, and I feel this is probably due to like load and buffer times,
Yeah.
and costs really because in order to they would have either had to keep the same technology, which at the time in its space was kind of getting out of date, or develop like a mini Blu-ray disc, which was kind of probably a lot of extra R&D effort that they just chose to kind of sell the cartridges or move over to like even more so with the digital distribution. But yeah, this console sold 16 million, which is fairly reasonable.
That's not
But
bad. I think what it struggled most with is that even though it was, yes, graphically superior,
mm-hmm,
it did kind of have a weak launch, a little bit of confusion because there was two different versions of this that were sold.
mm-hmm.
There was a standard, and then there was a 3G version,
Okay,
which you would need like a cell phone plan for
yeah,
because it needed to constantly be connected,
mm-hmm,
or you had just your standard Wi-Fi version.
right,
So people were a little bit confused about that out of the gate.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I feel that its main falter was its timing in being released
yeah,
because it was at the time, which will it's our next subject, but it came out whenever cell phones really technologically advanced and started to get a lot more complex games, and people kind of saw cell phones as the portable gaming option, it was either that or Nintendo, because Nintendo obviously had like the largest market share, and then cell phones was just eating away at it. That the PSP Vita just couldn't find as much of a place that the original PSP iterations could have.
But I think I find what's most interesting about the Vita is
Hmm.
that even though it basically has no first party support at this point,
Yeah,
it has a huge support from like indie markets.
yeah, because like they have released dev kits for it and everything that help indie developers create games for this platform, and I think it's really cool that this kind of has become a playground for indie game developers.
Yeah, like a lot of companies. One of my favorites, Limited Run.
Hmm.
They they actually tend to release quite a bit of their stuff on the Vita.
Yeah.
You'll get these big Vita releases for stuff that has no physical release.
Hmm.
And if you want a physical copy of it, you have to buy a Vita version,
Yeah.
which I find really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, because it definitely has its diehard fans because like its tech is very impressive and it is a pretty innovative system. But yeah, they like you mentioned, they stopped first and second party support for it and just kept on making consoles just because there was so much indie support for it that they were like, okay, well this is kind of like a device for like that
Yeah.
that market basically. And yeah, so yeah, its top selling games were surprisingly Minecraft. I didn't actually think that the Minecraft would be as big of a game on this console as it is, but
Yeah.
it sold 2.47 million copies. I'm sure most of those are downloads, but
And then you've got Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified,
mhm.
which was 1.71 million.
Yeah, and then this is the game I thought would be on the top just because of it being Uncharted, but Uncharted Golden Abyss is number three at 1.62 million copies. So yeah, it's definitely a really cool system and highly loved by the people who have one and still play it to this day. So continuing on, as we mentioned a little bit in the Vita section, cell phone games kind of enter the market around this era of like the mid 2000s. And we did do an entire episode on mobile games and cell phone games, which if you want to check out is episode 21, where we go more in depth about this topic. But yeah, basically, this is a point where they've kind of gathered a large enough market share due to the technology advancements in cell phone games, where you kind of like started with like Snake and early arcade games like Pac-Man and Galaga and stuff like that, into actually being able to play like Final Fantasy and
I mean, well,
different games and stuff.
at this point, you have actual like
Game,
releases just being like you have
yeah.
games being released on this that aren't released on other things
Hmm.
that might eventually later be picked up by a console.
Yeah.
And I think what really sells this is that they have an install base.
Hmm.
Like there, it's
Because
not.
you basically, it's come to the point where everybody basically has a cell phone,
Yeah,
and like you usually have one over a landline, especially within the age demographic of gamers, right?
yeah.
So,
So it's you don't have to work to sell them
hmm,
this console. You don't have to
yeah,
be like we have the best games. It's you have to have this.
yeah, and this has kind of like come to the conclusion of like it gathering so much market share that even Nintendo has silently dropped support of the 3DS over the past year and focused more on the Nintendo Switch, which is a portable console hybrid, which is doing really well. And now Nintendo has even released smaller, more portable version of that Switch, which is more for people who want a more smaller portable console, and has even released games on cell phones.
Which I think is the most mind blowing
Yeah,
thing.
like the Mario Kart Tour just came out,
Yeah,
and
there was a Dr. Mario,
mhm,
Animal Crossing,
yeah,
and
and
Mario
they're
Run.
yeah, and like
Like,
I'm sure eventually like other large IPs like Star Fox or Metroid and Zelda will eventually come over to the cell phone,
yeah,
hopefully. And it's kind of like them admitting that the cell phone market is just like it's now part of the main dominating factor of like portable console games, and it kind of like branches over into like Apple Arcade and how that's being released, or has been released over the last week, and it's
Yeah.
like a $10 subscription, whereas like Google's releasing their version Stadia, which is coming out soon for Android users, and I'm sure that will divide it and fracture the cell phone market, much like the PC market is sort of being fractured currently with digital distributions, which we
With
also go,
Epic and
yeah, which we have an
Steam.
episode on as well if you want to look into that. So it kind of leads us to where we are now with the Nintendo Switch, and it kind of being another console where it's the first real hybrid solution where it's both the current gen home console and portable console unit in one, whereas previously you had some
You had to
examples.
spend like $450 to have your TurboGrafx 16 and your
Yeah,
Turbo Express.
exactly. And this is kind of like where we've come, and are now, from the Super Game Boy and Game Boy players. Those type of things don't really need to exist anymore with the
No.
Switch, and things are being ported over to it that are previous consoles, kind of like how like the 3DSs. A lot of people use it for the virtual console. I know it was available on the Wii and the Wii U and things like that. But I know a lot of people like they generally play those portable handheld games on the virtual console on the 3DS, for example. But now it's all in one package essentially.
Yeah, and I find there's no more choosing now.
Hmm.
Like it's not like before where it's like, oh, I've got to find a wall I've got to plug into, and now
Yeah.
I've got to sit next to this wall because my system's dying, but want to keep playing this. No, I just take it over to the docking station. I drop it in. I pop the. Actually, I don't. I leave them in. I grab my controller,
Yeah.
and I keep playing.
Although I will say that I sometimes do just lie on the couch and then plug in the cable into the bottom and keep on playing a portable.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I'm not
Just
gonna
like
lie.
the good old
Sometimes
days.
I will be lazy and I'll just plug it in
Yeah.
if I have the plug close enough.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, my docking station is downstairs, hooked up to my TV, and like I said, I almost always keep portable system on my nightstand, and
Hmm.
that's generally my Switch now.
Yeah.
It has a super robust eShop,
Hmm.
which you can get everything from like unique indie titles to like brand new releases.
Yeah, and they're
Um,
releasing more and more of the new releases, day one, with the Nintendo Switch. A lot of them
be
have been released at the same time.
beyond day one, because a lot of these things you can preload
Hmm.
so that as soon as midnight hits,
Yep.
bam, your license goes through and it's playable.
Yeah.
You already have that downloaded. You don't have to wait for it to download. And
Yeah, it's very similar to the PC market
yeah,
in that respect.
it it has really shifted.
Hmm.
And to me, I have a very hard time playing other systems because the accessibility of this.
Yeah.
If I'm gonna play an 80-hour RPG, man, it's way easier to play that 80 hours while I'm like,
Over here and over there, and
yeah.
in between this and in between that. Yeah, it's definitely has a lot of pros to it for
And
sure.
there's no having to like I don't even have to stop. I can
Hmm.
hit pause, hit the like little sleep button,
Yep.
put it away.
Hmm. As long as it doesn't run out of battery power, it'll be good to go.
Which I find your low power standby,
Hmm.
it'll last a couple of
It
days.
will, yeah. Yeah.
So, um, yeah, I mean, I think we're in an amazing place right now, and
Yeah.
I really think going forward, all we're gonna see is probably a continuation of this.
From Nintendo, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to see anything like Sony's not going to release another handheld, and Microsoft has never tried a handheld.
Hmm.
But I think, yeah, Nintendo's going to keep something similar to this.
Yeah.
And this is going to be drastically successful
Hmm.
because of the flexibility.
Yeah, especially with their new iteration of it with the light version, essentially.
Yeah,
I think that's a really great idea because it's a little bit cheaper, it's more portable, it's great for
because it'd
kids.
be a little bit more durable. You
Yep.
don't have any like
The
removable
Joy Cons
parts.
don't like come on and off, and so like that's not a part that can like the hinges won't break.
You trade a couple features,
Mhm.
but yeah,
Yeah, has a better
it's
D-pad. That is an actual D-pad.
Oh,
You didn't know that?
I didn't.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But anyway.
So let's go into some of our favorite handheld games,
Hmm.
and and end with like favorite consoles.
Hmm.
JC, what would be one of your favorite handheld games?
So the first one that I wanted to mention is actually a portable handheld that's just like an exclusive game called Merlin and the 10th Quest. It was released in 1996. It's kind of cool. It's got 9 puzzles, and after you finish these logic puzzles, you unlock the 10th quest. And each one kind of gets progressively more difficult. And beating the 10th quest, you have effectively uh, beaten Merlin in his game and have won. And I've always liked puzzle games, and this was really cool because it was portable and I could take it on. And I still remember the little sound effects and everything in the back of my mind. And I had tons of fun playing this game. Your first
Nice.
one, Ian?
The Ace Attorney series,
Mm-hmm.
across the DS and 3DS.
Yeah.
I mean, they're available on more things now, but yeah, it's a great series. Just wonderful little stories, and the I guess the portability is what I really enjoyed. I liked being able to like, you know, have these bite-sized segments of a story
Right.
and be like, oh, okay, I'm done. It's like reading a book. Um, yeah, your next one.
The next one I'll mention is for the PlayStation Pocket, and that one is Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions. I'm a really big fan of the PlayStation version of this game, and this is a really great reimagining of it and update of the game with its cutscenes, new classes and features and things like that, and small tweaks that they added to the game. And if you really like strategy RPGs and Final Fantasy series and you've never played this game, definitely look into it. It's a great game. Yours?
It's fine, man. Final Fantasy Tactics Advanced, because it's advanced. Um,
Yeah, this is a great version of Final Fantasy Tactics too. It's definitely.
yeah, it's a lot of fun. I liked that you could build the map. I liked that there was actually a correct way to build the map, which you'd
Hmm.
be rewarded for,
Yeah.
but you weren't punished for messing it up.
Hmm.
I loved the class system. I loved all of it. It was my first foray into Final Fantasy Tactics because I never played it on the PS1.
Cool.
So yeah, I put hundreds of hours on this.
Awesome. So my next one is Harvest Moon Boy and Girl. As some viewers have probably noticed from watching the series, I'm a big fan of Harvest Moon. More so, not its latest renditions, but the Back to Nature game for the PlayStation was one of my favorites, and this is actually that game and a Japanese game where it's the same thing, but you're a girl instead of a boy mixed together, and you can decide to play either or. And it's a really great version of the Harvest Moon series. So if you like Harvest Moon or Stardew Valley, which it's based off of the Harvest Moon series, this is a really great version of the game, and it's portable. So that's my next one. Yours, Ian?
The Sims busting out for the Game Boy Advance.
Cool.
It is similar to a Sims game for the PC, but
Hmm.
also not, because you have one character that you look after. So you still make your character, but you also get quests. And yeah, you build yourself up through each individual section of the game,
Right.
always moving into bigger and better places. But you also have like mini games to earn money. Um, yeah, you still have to manage his like various needs and wants.
Cool.
Yeah, to me, this was an awesome Sims experience. I played this front to back at least twice.
Nice.
So, next one for you, JC.
My next one is Final Fantasy Legend 3 for the Game Boy. Um, this is actually a really interesting game because it's the Final Fantasy formula in portable form. There's 3 Legend games and an adventure game for the Game Boy, and this one really impressed me because of its story. Actually, was pretty in depth. It had a pretty cool combat system, and through its simple interface and features and stuff like that. And it was just an overall really enjoyable game. And I think this is the games just got better and better, and this one's the best in the series. So I put this one on my list. Your next one, Ian?
Wasn't that basic? I'm sorry, I know you're gonna have to cut this. Wasn't that basically the first Secret of Mana?
No. Final Fantasy Adventure is the first Secret of Mana.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Although it's Final Fantasy Legend is a saga game,
Oh,
and so yeah, Final Fantasy Legend 1, 2, and 3 are actually saga games. A bunch of their features from the classes, like the monsters being characters and stuff like that, are actually from the saga series, and it's kind of
okay.
like a Gaiden series of the saga series. But it was rebranded as Final Fantasy because it's a more known franchise in North
Shit.
America. That's what the Legend games are. But Adventure 1 is the first um, uh,
Secret of Mana.
Secret of Mana.
Mutant Blob's Attack for the PS Vita.
Cool.
It was a downloadable game.
Mm-hmm.
The Vita didn't have a ton when it launched,
Right.
and yeah, I saw this. I was kind of interested. Yeah, it's a really neat story. Very like 50s ish, like alien invasion aesthetic. And yeah, you're this mutant blob that rolls around and becomes bigger. It has that little bit of Katamari esque to it, where you're eating up stuff and getting bigger and bigger.
Cool.
Um, yeah, and interestingly enough, it features a soundtrack and a guest appearance by Sean Hatton.
Cool.
So, yeah, neat little, I guess, Easter egg there. Next one for you, JC.
My next game is my favorite Game Boy game, Link's Awakening DX for the Game Boy Color. That was released in 1998.
You said no Switch games.
It's not technically a Switch game. Well, technically it is now, but anyway. Yeah, this is I meant literal Switch games. So yeah, this is a really great game. What's interesting about this is it has two item A and B selection for your items, and in the Link's Awakening for the Super Nintendo, originally in the development of the game, they actually played around with being able to combine items and being able to like combine bombs and arrows, for example, and then whenever you shoot an arrow, it would blow up. And they actually decided to cut that out because Miyamoto actually said that he wanted the sword to be mandatory whenever playing the game,
Mm.
because it was kind of like an aesthetic of Zelda, and they actually added that feature set into Link's Awakening fully fledged into the Game Boy game, which was really cool idea and innovation in the series that we actually got to play in the form of a game. And I also thought that the story was really cool, and its twist, which I won't go into. It's a really great game. The new version has just come out over the last couple weeks for the Nintendo Switch, which is probably its best version. And yeah, definitely check it out. Your next one, Ian?
Exit for the PSP.
Cool.
It's a puzzle game, essentially. You're a dude with a sweet red tie. Everyone's basically like outlines or like shadow looking characters, but
Okay.
he does have this red tie that stands out.
Right.
And yeah, each level is a different scenario. And you usually have to like rescue a person
Yeah.
and get them to the exit as well as getting yourself to the exit, whether you're going through like fire or the various different like traps and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're into puzzle games, it's pretty intense.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a lot of levels.
Right.
But yeah, it's a really good time on the PSP. Actually, I think it's on pretty much anything now, but PSP was where I discovered.
Cool.
Your next one?
Star Fox Command. So one of my favorite Star Fox games is the original Star Fox. I actually like it quite a bit more than Star Fox 64. I know. Star Fox 64 is just a better version of Star Fox. I get it. But Star Fox 2 was something that I was really, really interested in growing up, in its development cycle by Argonaut Games, and its limited coverage in magazines, and posthumously looking into it and stuff like that. And then eventually playing it in the demo of it in high school on emulated ROM. And Star Fox Command was really interesting and fun, in my opinion, because it took the ideas and concepts from the unreleased Star Fox 2 and to an extent, kind of some of its assets, and released it as a game in its same style. It's a very different game, but it's still very, very similar in its presentation and stuff, and it adds in like a bunch of the characters because like many of the characters and ideas that they added into Star Fox 64 were really just like ported over from Star Fox 2. For example, like the rivals and stuff like that from Star Fox 2 were were just from Star Fox. Sorry, like the rivals from Star Fox 64 are just really from Star Fox 2, and I really like the idea of like moving out and choosing where you're intercepting the different obstacles and stuff like that, and it's more of a modular combat system, and you don't necessarily have to do some certain things and everything. So I really enjoyed this game, and it's what I just really like it. It's a really good, fully fleshed Star Fox 2 type game, and that plays more like the original Star Fox than the remake. So, yeah, Star Fox Command. Your next one, Ian?
Me and My Katamari for the PSP.
This is a great game.
It is a great game, and
Yeah.
it's kind of underappreciated and sort of forgotten
Yeah, I
because
find
it was
it
on the
really
PSP.
unfortunate because like I think this is probably my favorite Katamari version. And although I do like the idea of being able to control the your ball that collects everything with
Your
the two
Katamari.
analog sticks. Yeah. And that you didn't have both of them with this
No, you
console,
didn't.
but just the gameplay and everything and the levels and stuff like that, I felt were really enjoyable in this version.
Yeah, it was a very competent Katamari game that I could
Hmm.
play anywhere I wanted to be. It wasn't, to me, it wasn't quite as good as Beautiful Katamari,
Okay, yeah.
which would have been the second one. No, as
No,
we
that's we and
we
my
love
kind of
Katamari.
we love Katamari.
Sorry,
I never
it's
played Beautiful Katamari, so I can't compare that.
it's not quite as good as We Love Katamari, which was the second on the PlayStation 2.
Fair enough.
But it was still like it's still a totally competent Katamari game
Hmm.
that you can play on the go,
Hmm.
which you didn't really get again until Touch My Katamari.
Right.
So your next one?
Sonic 2 for the Game Gear, which was released in
This is
1992.
a good game.
Yeah,
Hang gliders.
yeah. The Sonic 2 game formula for the Game Gear was very similar to the original Sonic the Hedgehog, and people who played Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 for the Genesis will realize that the games play a lot differently. And one of the reasons why is because of the people who actually worked on the game and the direction that they went with it. And I actually kind of like the original Sonic a little bit better than the second Sonic. Controversial, I know, but the Game Gear games were a lot like the first one and really good in their own right and played a lot differently than the like Sonic 2, 3, and Sonic and Knuckles. And in my opinion, the best one out of those was Sonic 2. So if you really like platforming Sonic games, where you're not just necessarily 100% zipping through the entire level, the Game Gear games are definitely really great games to look into. Same with the Sonic Advance games, but Sonic 2 is my favorite one. Your next one, Ian?
Another PSP title called Prinny.
Mm-hmm.
Can I Really Be the Hero?
Mm-hmm.
This was a spin-off of the Disgaea series
Mm-hmm.
where you would play as a Prinny.
Yep.
Except it was a action platformer.
Yeah. Which are the penguins, in case nobody or knows that?
Yeah, the homicidal penguins that have bombs and daggers.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, no, this was a ton of fun. You started out with 1,000 Prinnies, and as you would die, your total Prinny count would go down until you were totally out of Prinnies, and then you would have to start the game all over again.
Yeah.
So you only had 1,000 lives to finish it,
Mm-hmm.
which was kind of cool because a lot of games don't do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So just a neat little thing to see. And yeah, solid action platformer with homicidal penguins.
Cool. My next one, this one was kind of hard to decide the third game of this console to put on here, but Streets of Rage 2 for the Game Gear, which is released in 1993. If you're really a big fan of beat 'em ups, This is a very competent portable version of the Streets of Rage formula. And what's really interesting about this is if you compare Streets of Rage 2 for the Genesis to the Master System, obviously like they look a lot different. And but the cool thing about this is like if you actually sit down and play it, the style is still there. The music is still pretty close in an 8-bit rendition. And it's neat because it has its own unique move sets where the attacks work a little bit differently and stuff like that.
Well, I guess you only had 2-button control instead of 3.
Yeah. So the special was just the start button, if I recall correctly. But anyway, yeah, and so you uh you had a very competent beat 'em up game that played really nicely. It didn't have too much slowdown in it, and it looked really great for the console that it was on. And yeah, being a fan of beat 'em ups and the Streets of Rage series, this is definitely a really cool game. And if you do happen to have another friend who has a Game Gear with this game, it actually does work with the link cable, and you can play 2 players with it. So yeah,
Oh.
Streets of Rage 2. Yeah. Your next one, Ian?
Ghost Trick for the DS.
Cool.
What was from the same director as the Ace Attorney series. We get another game, which quite different, but you're still solving a mystery, which was kind of neat. You die, spoiler alert, at the very beginning of the game, and you become a ghost,
Right.
and you get to take control over different parts of the environment.
Cool.
And then sometimes you'll have to like rewind and do it over again if you don't get the correct result. Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. It's a really cool mystery. It has one of the best animal characters in a game,
Cool.
Missile the dog, and yeah, it's a whole lot of fun. It's a really great mystery, and it kind of keeps you guessing until the end.
Awesome.
Your next one?
This one's probably my favorite portable console game, and that's GG Shinobi for the Game Gear, which was released in 1991. This game is fantastic. It pushed the console to the limits. It had really unique game loop. It took the Shinobi formula and completely changed it, but
Oh,
it still feels like Shinobi, and that's really
okay.
impressive. The music is very stellar. It's a great example of what the Game Gear can output using its 8-bit architecture. And basically, you're the red Shinobi ninja, and you have to rescue the 4 other color Shinobi.
Oh,
And each Shinobi has a special ability where they each have a different power, and you can play the 4 levels in any order.
so it's like Ninja Mega Man.
Kind of, yeah,
Okay.
actually. So you could basically switch between the different shinobi, and each one had their own power, and you basically could get through different levels more easily by having the specific powers, or only get like the extra man or some extra hearts or something like that if you only had a certain shinobi. So like getting them in certain orders would basically give you different advantages.
Okay.
And then after you complete all 4 levels, you went to the 5th and final level, which is kind of like a couple stages with all of the 5 shinobi, and you'd have to use the abilities of all 5 of them. And as you learned and mastered their different abilities and skills, throughout the 4 different levels in order to be able to beat the final area of the game. And I always wondered why they didn't make a consoleized version of this type of Shinobi, because I really like the Shinobi series as well for the Genesis and the Master System title. But yeah, the arcade version, which is the Master System as well, and the Game Gear and the Genesis Shinobis all kind of work differently, but kind of feel like a Shinobi game because they have very similar gameplay mechanics. But this is like my favorite Shinobi game by far, and it's a really great game. If you want to play it, it is on the Virtual Console, and it's probably the easiest way to get it. It's on the like Wii U and 3DS, and it's only like $5 or something like that.
It's not bad.
So it's a really great game, Shinobi for the Game Gear. Your next one, Ian?
The World Ends With You
Mm-hmm.
on the Nintendo DS. You can actually pick this up on the Switch now, which I probably wouldn't recommend. But yeah, the DS version, totally worth grabbing. It was a really interesting RPG released probably like late 2000s.
Cool.
And yeah, it's you play as like a bunch of teenagers, typical RPG. But so it all takes place around the Shibuya district in Tokyo.
Hmm.
A lot you spend a lot of time in the like actual crossing, the like big iconic one that you see.
Cool.
But then there's also some like little side streets in that.
Right.
But yeah, it all takes place in this area, and the combat is kind of what's most interesting about this.
Hmm.
It's a pin-based system, so you
Okay.
equip abilities by equipping these pins to your characters, and then you actually have to use the stylus on the bottom screen
Right.
to do something to the pin,
Hmm.
which will then trigger an attack on the top screen. Well, at the same time, moving around on the top screen and avoiding enemy attacks.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff going on. Your pins will level up over time. It does have this really interesting feature where if you close your system but
Mhm.
leave it on in like standby, and you pass by somebody else who has the game also in standby, you can you'll like meet up with their character and you can actually trade items. Your pins will gain experience just from like meeting them.
Right.
It did have like a pin battle multiplayer mode,
Okay.
and yeah, there's a lot there.
Cool.
So, what's your last one, JC?
The last one on my list is the reason why I bought a Game Boy eventually. I picked up a OG Game Boy from a friend for like $10 or $20 or something like that because he had the Pocket and didn't want this anymore. But Pokemon Blue, because it's the best Pokemon version.
Nah, man, you're wrong. It's Pokemon Red.
Is it?
Yeah, Pokemon Red's the best Pokemon
All right,
version.
if you say so.
Pokemon Red is my last one, and it is so much better than Pokemon Blue.
All right, fine then. So yeah, those are some of our favorite portable console games, and
We just wanted to finish off with kind of our favorite our favorite handhelds.
mhm.
I can tell you none of them are Tiger Electronics. JC,
Yeah.
what's your favorite? Give me your list.
Yeah, so my list is pretty simple. The number 3 is the Nintendo DS, and the reason why I like this one so much is, and this is specifically the light version, is because it's reverse compatible to a lot of the older games, and its library is really good. And I think this is an area in the Nintendo DS's life cycle that it was kind of like at its peak, sort of, until the 3DS came out, and followed by the PSP 2000, specifically for the reasons that I mentioned during my
Hooking up to
spiel.
your TV, playing
Hooking up
games
to
on
my
your TV.
and it being a portable MP3 player and having all those extra functionalities, because I actually did use quite a few of them.
And where else were you going to play Third Birthday?
Yeah, right. I wish that game didn't exist. Anyway, so yeah, and it brought us a lot of great games. And my favorites, which is probably fairly obvious, is the Sega Game Gear.
What?
Yeah, I know, right? You thought it was a Game Boy, but nope, it's the Game Gear. Yeah, it
Johnny Sega over here.
yeah, I loved how it was color. I worked around its battery life, and it had its cons, it has its pros, and I love this console. I got so much usage out of it, and I'm really looking forward to whenever Analog releases the cart adapter to be able to plug in my Game Gear games into my Analog SG, which I got, so I can replay a bunch of my Game Gear games on the TV, and yeah, I just a lot of great games, a lot of love for the system. Yours, Ian?
I mean, it is kind of similar to yours. So my number 3 was the PSP Go.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that it was an all digital console, which is crazy as somebody who loves physical media. I loved that it was just a screen. I flick it open, and I'd have access to whatever I loaded on there.
Yeah.
And like my PSP Go had, I think, 20 RPGs.
Yeah.
Like PS1 era.
Yeah.
And then I had a PSP RPGs on there as well.
Right.
So I had all this stuff, and it was just like immediate. I could just snap it open,
Mm-hmm.
start playing, live the dream,
Yeah.
and then as soon as I'm done, I could just like throw it and shut down, like in sleep mode,
Mm-hmm.
pop it closed, throw it in my pocket because of how portable it was,
Right.
and continue on. My number 2 You already mentioned it. Nintendo DS is a little higher up for me because I love the game library.
Yeah.
That's what really sells it for me. I have so many DS titles, and I have so much love for all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, you had, I think, 6 Ace Attorney games. I mean, come on,
Hmm.
Ace Attorney games. And for me, my number one has to be the Switch.
Yeah.
Has to be. I mean, I I don't play anything else more than I play the Switch.
Hmm.
It's
It sounds like you've been playing the Switch like just as much as like any other console that you've ever played.
yeah, I probably play I this gets more attention now than my PS4.
Hmm.
This is taken over from my PS4
Yeah.
as my like main go-to for gaming.
Right.
So,
Yeah, definitely says something. And like we had mentioned, it's a great console because it's the collection of both the home console market and portable console market
yep.
all in one. And like we both feel that Nintendo will continue to release consoles this way. We could be wrong,
That's
they
true.
tend to change their mind quite a bit. And
I mean, you're not going to get necessarily the same experiences that you will with the like a PS4 or a PC or an Xbox One.
but then again,
Uh,
you can in a lot of cases
Yeah,
because they're porting over a lot of games, and it's been pretty impressive.
it has
It
been.
looked a little bit like less detailed and stuff like that in some of
Yep.
the instances, like the
Yeah.
Skyrim port and stuff like that.
Or
But
like I mentioned before, the Mutant Year Zero port
mhm,
is less than stellar,
yeah,
but I mean, hey, that's one game.
yeah,
You have a really robust indie library, which I'm a huge fan of.
hmm,
And then you have like all these outstanding first party and third party titles
yeah,
that are exclusive to the console.
yeah,
So it's a no brainer.
yeah. But yeah, those are our favorite games and consoles. Let us know what your favorite game, portable video game is, and your favorite portable console is, down in the comments below. And be sure to like and subscribe, especially if you've made it through the entire episode. It'll help us out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you know anybody who would like this type of content, be sure to share it over with them. Follow us on both Twitter and Facebook. Links are in the description below. We'll see you next week.